Good evening and a very warm welcome to all our viewers. My name is Samantha Castle and I'm the Senior Manager for Alumni Relations at the University of Pretoria. Today, we are proud to present our very first LeadUP Women Alumni virtual chat. As you might recall, we've hosted many LeadUP discussions over the past few months. However, today's discussion is very special as we celebrate Women's Month with phenomenal UP alumni women as our panelists. The panelists will reflect on their time at the university, where they find themselves right now, and what they still need to do or what should still be done to bring about true gender equality in our society. As a female UP graduate myself, I'm looking forward to this intergenerational conversation and hearing inspiring stories from these remarkable women tonight. Nosipo Shabalala, a conversation strategist, a global moderator, and a very proud UP alumna, is our moderator this evening. Thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you for your ongoing support. We really, really do appreciate it. Without any further ado, allow me to introduce to you our Vice Chancellor and Principal, Professor Tawana Kupe, to welcome you tonight. Kupe, over to you.
Thank you, Samantha. A very warm welcome to all of you UP alumni. I also know from running these events that other people follow our events. So welcome to our associates who are not necessarily UP alumni. Happy Women's Month, everybody. We must say Happy Women's Month because we must honor, reflect, and praise the achievements of women without necessarily forgetting all of those things that still undermine women's equality. And I'll talk about them in a short while. UP has top women all across the board. The women you see on the panel today, from the moderator Nozipo through to Professor Esme Duplessis, who was once the chairperson of the Council of the University of Pretoria, served on 15 years as an extraordinary professor and a lawyer, to Dr. Mpho Shivase at 34, first woman with a philosophy degree, chair of the Southern African Historical Society, Tawelo Mojapelo, CEO of BP Southern Africa, Andrea Campbell, commercial attorney for Microsoft South Africa. Our women at UP simply rock. We also have top professors who are A-rated, Professor Stella Ngoma and others. UP leads in having women in the top. We also run a lot of programs for women's empowerment and leadership and supporting their academic careers. And because we believe without gender equality, our society suffers and loses. Women are just over more than half of the population in South Africa and of the world population. Without them being empowered, even self-empowered and allowed to thrive, this undermines the totality of the sustainable development in South Africa. In this regard, even though we say Happy Women's Month, I must also express UP and my strong abhorrence to the fact that we have such high levels of gender-based violence of all forms, that we must eradicate gender-based violence. It is a civil war in South Africa today. And this again undermines human rights because women's rights are human rights. This we need to get rid of by addressing the patriarchal roots and the sexist attitudes, the biases, and the discrimination. And we will hear more from our very accomplished women on this panel today. UP also last year passed a strong anti-discrimination policy, which goes at the heart of addressing all forms of gender-based violence and also seeking to influence society in that regard. Let me also come to say to you is that I wish to announce today that two UP alumni have made it to the finals of the Miss South Africa. They are in the top 10, Dr. Ramdev and Ms. Mosida. We hope they actually win because that will confirm UP women are tops, their brains as well as beauty, and they are fighters and champions for women's rights. I'd like to also inform you that UP continues to do very well in the rankings. We came number one in UniRank recently in South Africa, on the continent, and number 183 in the world. We are also in the top 1.9% of universities in the world. I'd like to end by thanking all of you who have come today, thanking our panelists, but also thanking our alumni relations manager, Samantha Castley, and her team. We're glad at UP also that our alumni relations manager is a woman. Happy Women's Month. Let's enjoy this conversation and let's all fight for the total liberation of women.
Thank you, Prof. Coupe, and thank you so much for also being an avid advocate for women's rights at our university and in society. I want to say that for the next few weeks, we will be taking a break from our LeadUP alumni discussions, and we will be back in September. So please look forward to some great discussions, which we will be bringing to you back in September. But now, without any further ado, allow me to hand it over to Nosipho for a wonderful discussion. I'm looking so forward to it, Nosipho. I'm really looking forward to the inspirational stories that we are going to be hearing from our female panelists tonight.
Thank you so much, Samantha, and of course, a very big thank you to Professor Coupe, ladies, and the few gentlemen that have joined us from every corner around the world. I've come to understand that this is a truly global conversation. So good morning to you, good evening, good afternoon from wherever you join us, and a huge, huge welcome to the LeadUP Women Alumni Virtual Chat. As Samantha has introduced me, my name is Nosipho Shabalala, and it is an absolute honor and an absolute pleasure to be moderating this conversation at my alma mater, of course, as a graduate myself of the University of Pretoria. Now, before we jump into the panel, I do want to bring your focus to the theme or the tagline, if you will, of today's conversation. We are having a conversation titled UP Women, Looking Back, Looking Ahead, and Taking the Lead. And so tonight, what you're going to experience is a panel of diverse women, many of them UP graduates, but all of them having touched UP and impacted UP in one way or the other. And they're going to be doing a couple of things with us. They're going to be reflecting on the time that they spent at the institution. They'll also be sharing with us where they find themselves now, the various opportunities and the challenges that are unique to their particular industries and context, but they also, as Sam has indicated, going to be speaking to some of their views on how we might hasten or accelerate the attainment of gender equality in our society. Now, Prof. Coupe reminds us that when we are talking about women's empowerment, it is no small feat. We're talking that about more than half of our global population. And we're talking about an issue of humanity proportions, because when society, when women suffer, we know that society suffers and society loses out. I perhaps also want to underscore one other thing that he said, which is of incredible importance at a time where gender-based violence is still such a huge problem in South Africa. He equated to a civil war. And that is exactly, ladies and gentlemen, the kind of rhetoric that we need to hear at this time. Now, as we get into the session, it's a great pleasure for me to also invite you to please claim your share of voice in this conversation. We'd love to see your questions. We'd love to see your comments on all the platforms where we're live on this evening. Let us know what you would like to be communicated to our panelists, and I will try to the best of my ability to integrate some of your comments and your questions in the conversation. Having said that, also please expect we're going to be doing some polls as well in this conversation. So we are going to have a very interactive experience. So I look forward to your full engagement. It gives me great pleasure now to introduce our panelists. And I start with Andrea Campbell. Andrea is a commercial attorney at Microsoft SA. And Andrea actually achieved her Bachelor of Laws at the University of Pretoria, but she comes into this conversation with more than a decade of corporate law, finance, financial services, investment banking, and even telecommunications. She is part of Microsoft SA, being part of the Information Technology Association, as well as Andrea, welcome. also please introduce Andrea Campbell. She is the Chief Executive Officer of BP Southern Africa, and she's also the Vice President of the company. Experience just 2 years shy of 2 days of corporate and led some of this.
Hi there, we apologize for the technical difficulties that we're experiencing right now. Nozi, I think her sound, her Wi-Fi is playing up, and so while Nozi is getting her Wi-Fi reconnected again, allow me, welcome Andrea, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
And
we're excited to have you join us. Nozi, are you back on, or is your Wi-Fi working? Are we working through the technical difficulties this evening?
I'm certainly back, and I do apologize for those technical difficulties. Sam, thank you for being my right-hand woman at all times. So I'm going to just make sure that I had introduced Andrea. Andrea, if you can give me a thumbs up that we've gotten that right. So let me then move on to introduce Madame Taelo again, in case we've missed her. Taelo Mujapilo, thank you so much. So she is the CEO of BP Southern Africa. She's also the vice president of the company. She comes into this experience with just 2 years shy of 2 decades of corporate experience. And I was saying earlier that what a pleasure to introduce a corporate titan who has led in a range of enterprises, including SAB, including Kellogg, Mondelez, and DHL. And her accolades are very, very long. But for now, this is how I will introduce Taelo. Thank you so much for being here with us this evening. I then move on to Dr. Mpho Chibase. Dr. Mpho is a senior lecturer at the University of Pretoria and president of the Philosophical Society of Southern Africa. Now, as I said earlier, not all of our panelists are alumni, but certainly all have played a role in this institution, and Dr. Mpho is one of those. She comes into this conversation also very active in the university, lecturing undergraduate as well as postgraduate students in ethics, bringing both an African and a Western lens into ethics. She's authored and reviewed many academic publications. And in 2019, just last year, she was recognized in the very prestigious Mail and Guardian top 200 young South Africans. So, Dr. It's very lovely to have you here with us. We also have, of course, Dr. Karishma Ramdar, who we learned earlier today, has made it into South Africa. We truly appreciate that she's been able to make time.
We seem to be experiencing quite a bit of technical difficulties with Nozi's connection. We will really try to bring her back in a little bit. But as she mentioned, welcome Karishma, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. And today is also a very special occasion for you, as we have learned that you've been announced as one of the top 10 finalists in the Miss South Africa pageant. So a special congratulations to you for flying the UP flag very proudly in the Miss South African pageant. So welcome and thank you so much for joining us. So I think what we're going to do, we're going to play a little catch and throw as we work through tonight's session. Nozi, so please take over. It's over to you. Hopefully it doesn't bomb out again.
Again, I'm crossing fingers here, Sam, and really hoping that our connection holds. But a very big welcome and huge congratulations to you, Dr. Ramdev. We're all rooting for you, and of course, the other alumni who we know is sharing that top 10 spot with you. I want to make sure that we don't miss Professor Esme Duplessis, who I'm introducing now. Prof. Cooper, introduced her as a professor extraordinaire, and she certainly is. She's a retired professor of law, but most importantly, the first woman to be a qualified patent attorney, and this is as early as 1965, coming into the conversation. She's a former partner of Adams and Adams, and of course, we also know that she was at the helm of the UP Council for generational diversity and also
Yeah, this is definitely us having technical difficulties this evening. Again, to all our listeners, our apologies. We will try to keep the show going and try to keep Nozi coming in as we are able to do so. Hopefully, Nozi will be able to find another Wi-Fi spot to do a hotspot with her Wi-Fi. But let's get on with the show. Without any further ado, allow me to ask and extend some of the questions to our esteemed panelists this evening. So I want to extend this question I want to start off by asking Tahelo Majupelo, who is the CEO of VP South Africa, and thank you so much again for making time to join us this evening. I want to ask you, what is the one thing most people don't know about you? And so if you can just share that little secrets with us, because I think it's important we start to get to know our panelists this evening.
Yeah, I often say thank you, Samantha. I often say to people, I'm an open book, so I'm not really an enigma, and I wear my heart on my sleeve, so what you see is what you get. But however, I must share that throughout my schooling years, I always wanted to be a neurosurgeon, and I got my first experience at failure, and I didn't make it to med school. So I had to make the most of the situation, and I then got into chemical technology, and I must say I enjoyed it, and I don't regret that experience. So sometimes things do happen for a reason, and I think a lot of people wouldn't know that about me.
Well, thank you for that feedback, and look at where you are now. You didn't go to med school per se, but now you are the CEO of VP Southern Africa. And the next question I would like to extend to Andrea. Andrea, out of all the goals you would like to achieve in the next 3 years, which would you say is the most important goal and why?
Thank you, Samantha. So I think for myself personally, over the next 3 years, the goal I'd like to achieve is to actually do a qualification to become a privacy law practitioner. I'm certified globally. I think it's important because the way that the world is moving towards technology, trust and information becomes a gold mine, and it's at the forefront of everything we seem to be doing these days. So for me, it's part of my progression, and I think it's really instrumental in where we're going globally.
So Sam, I'm going to pick it up from here again, and I've just picked up, of course, on the question on what do people don't know about you. That was to Tahelo, and Andrea picking up on the question on one of the goals that she'd like to achieve in the next 3 years. So I'm going to again step into the space, and one of the things that I wanted us to kick off with was to quickly run a poll that I'm going to just insert into the conversation now, with the view of coming back and picking up on the questions. An invitation there for you to answer that question on Slido. There it is. Would you like to hear more stories from women who are UP graduates? And it's a quick yes, I'd like to learn more, and no, I would not. Thank you so much. And I do see that a lot of you are active on Slido taking that poll. So I'm going to ask that we close the poll, and I'm going to continue with the conversation. Now, Andrea, thank you for sharing, one of the goals you'd like to achieve in the next 3 years. I'm quite keen, though, to maybe even hear from the other panelists. One thing that we still might not know about them. So let me go to Dr. Mpho. A very quick one, Mpho, in 30 seconds. Something that your students who are watching this right now are going to say, oh my goodness, I had no idea.
Thanks for that question, Nosy. I'm a horrible traveler. Like I hate traveling by myself. I lose everything. I've lost keys, hotel keys or house keys. I've lost bags with my credit cards and my laptops in a I'm just a horror. I prefer to travel with other people, because at least then I can manage my luggage.
I feel like I'm not alone in the world suddenly. And that's incredible for me to find out, because I can be quite absent-minded as well. Karishma, South Africa will probably want to know this, of one of their top 10 contestants. What's the one thing that people certainly don't know about you and maybe even wouldn't expect from you?
I think it would be that I'm participating in a beauty pageant, but I grew up as an absolute tomboy. I remember when it was time for our school photo and we'd actually get the photo, my mom would look at it and be so disappointed because my hair was disheveled. I would have sand all over my uniform, and she would just say to me, I'm not buying this photo because you did not look nice. Like, because I was just all about running around, playing in the field. I was a complete tomboy. I loved
Yeah.
insects, and now I'm completely afraid of them. It's just so strange.
So it's really, really strange. I mean, we've got a range of questions that we wanted to get to. But Prof. Esme, I'm going to, instead of asking you the same question, I'm going to share something about you that I found absolutely fascinating. And that was that in 1956, at the time, 1956 is such a pivotal year in South African history because that's when we remember the 20,000 women who marched to the Union buildings. In 1956, Prof. Esme du Plessis stepped onto the University of Pretoria grounds for the very first time in her first year. So what an amazing moment that this conversation takes place with such a woman. But the question I want to bring to you, Prof, is this. If you could have dinner with President Ramaphosa, what would you advise him to do over the next 18 months? So let's imagine you are part of his cabinet right now, or you had the ear of the president. What should he do in the next 18 months?
Nosy, it's a very difficult question, and I have to be careful. But what I really would like to persuade President Ramaphosa is to focus on education. I think the most important thing to me is to ask him to make sure that all the schools are accessible, are clean, are fully staffed, have all the necessary educational material, are accessible to all children of our nation, particularly the children from poor people. And that may be necessary then to set up some sort of support fund to make sure that people who cannot afford to go to school will be enabled to go to school. Because I believe that education is the one tool that enables people to achieve their goals, to advance their careers, to make a contribution. I believe it's a building block of our nation. So I would not focus on any of the other issues. I'll ask Cyril, please, Cyril, let us focus on education. Make sure that education is available to all the children in our country. That would be my main.
So education, education, education. And I saw a couple of nods as you were speaking. So I know Taelo is in agreement with you. She's nodding her head as you were speaking. And Ray, what would you do? What's the conversation that you would have with the president?
So for myself, I agree with Prof. Esme. Education and accessibility to education is important. But I think in addition to that, there is another topic that is quite pressing in South Africa, and it's the one of GBV. So for me, I would urge him to please concentrate on, especially during COVID, providing access to females to critical care, healthcare, those who are victims of GBV. I would also urge that some feedback. I would also urge that we start taking action. We are saying all the right things. Year on year, we are having the right conversations, but unfortunately, I think we are slow when it comes to actioning these. And I think the next 18 months, because it's such a it's an additional pandemic in South Africa. We need to honestly sit down and think 1 in 3 women are sexually assaulted and 2 in 5 are beaten. That's a heavy statistic, and it's been proven that during COVID, it's increased threefold. So not twice, but 3 times what it is, and it was said to be at 116% last time, which is it's higher, and it's tolerated twice as much as anywhere else in the world. So perhaps looking at that is quite a pressing issue in addition to the education piece.
And Ray, you've brought us to a very important point, which is really to focus on gender-based violence head on and sexual violence in general. And maybe, Taylor, I want to come to you with this. Is there a role for men here in terms of ensuring that we are taking this on? And may I ask everyone to please mute their microphone if they're not speaking? so that we can just limit the amount of feedback. So stop to proceed. You can mute your microphone, please. And then I'll ask Ayala just to respond to that question of the role for men.
Thank you, Nozi. I think this is a very important topic that we're engaging on today. And my view is, men are best owning this agenda. And what I find disappointing a lot of the time is that this agenda tends to be driven a lot by women. And I'm quite inspired by groupings such as Sisonke Gender Justice and all those that are, playing a pivotal role as men to make sure that we start working on this and eradicating it. But more than just men, Nozi, I think it's very important for us to also look at ourselves as parents, particularly those of us that are parents, and look at the instrumental role that we're playing as parents in how we are enforcing and grooming the right behavior in our boy children, as well as eliminating all the biases that come as a result of the upbringing that we have, that we give our boys and girls, and we need to teach them to coexist in an equal world with their girl siblings or, as peers in the classroom. But it's something that as men and fathers, they need to be playing that role, because I think sometimes we tend to want to discuss this when people are adults. And when they are adults, these boys are already men and are groomed in a particular way. So we best need to tackle this right from primary school into high school and into universities. We need to play a very strong role in making sure that we fight this, as opposed to being reactive when people have already got those biases and that type of behavior. So I think it's very important we tackle it there.
Thank you very much. Fantastic, Taylor. And what I'm hearing is that it certainly does start at home. If I could ask you to please mute your microphone as well, please. And thank you so much to our audience who are sending us through their questions. I see those questions. And one of the questions I'm going to get to is the one from Mayanda. But before I do want to pick up on this question. And maybe, Paul, let me come to this question with you. If you had all the resources that you could have in the world, what is one problem that negatively affects women in particular that you would direct these resources towards?
Thank you. That's a very good question, and I think I've thought a lot about it in different contexts, of course, before tonight. And I think if I did have those resources, I think I'd redirect them to, I think, training women to become financially independent, but also working with the different structures in the different institutions to deal more directly with the issue of gender pay gaps. I think it's so unfair that women get punished for simply being women. The fact, it really upsets me that there's somebody in say my institution, for instance, who's sitting at the exact same level as me, who can do exactly the same work as me, but just because he's a man, he gets to be paid 28% more than me. It's not that he's more brilliant. It's not that he is, a genius who can do the work 10 times better than me. It's simply that he is a man. Being a man entitles him to 28% more money every month than me. So that is what I would redirect the resources to.
So thank you very much. So financial independence and financial literacy for women, but also addressing a structural issue that we see playing out in many of our organizations, not only in South Africa, but certainly around the world, this persistent pay gap where for the same value of work, women would be paid even less. So I've got a quick question before we move on to our second poll. And maybe, Tyler, it's just to quickly come back to you based on what Dr. Paul has just said. Why are we not making progress in the private sector in this regard? Surely this is a conversation we've been having for decades. What is the biggest barrier that is standing in the way of women being remunerated equally as their male counterparts?
So what I'm going to share is possibly a personal perspective, the way I see things. And, my view is as women, we tend to rethink a lot of things and we tend to sell ourselves short. Whereas a lot of men, when they get into a role, many a time, without knowing much of a situation, and I've experienced that in the boardroom, they would handle themselves in a manner in a manner that demonstrates that they are in control and they understand the topic, and sometimes they may not even have a clue about what's going on. And I think as women, we just need to give ourselves tools to empower and demand our space. And I think I quite like the phrase that was coined by the previous Miss SA around taking space. And how do we make sure that we take space? But as well, in the corporate sector, you will find that you've got the same policies. People come in at a particular grade and are at the same grade. So you know that it should be within a certain range. But we tend to sell our experiences short. And it's only when you're now in the role that you realize that you've actually sold yourself short and want to start renegotiating at that point. So I think if we can give ourselves tools to empower ourselves such that we are a lot more assertive of what we are worth, but in a very in a manner that makes sure that we articulate and command that space adequately.
Yeah. Tyler, thank you very much for that. And I'll ask for muting again there. So what I'm hearing from you is that there's a certain degree of how we show up as women in the corporate space, that where we should be exercising greater agency, where we should not be, asking more questions. But also, while that happens, there needs to be structural changes at organizational levels, policies and processes that mitigate against these things happening in the very first place. So I'm seeing your questions. I'm going to get to them now. What I would like to do now is quickly just reveal the results of our first poll. We asked the question, whether you'd like to hear more stories from women who are UP graduates, and we got 0% on no and an absolute 100% on yes. So tonight, at the very least, we know that we are delivering on something that is very important to you. So those are the results of poll 1. I would like us to quickly launch poll 2. This, of course, is on Slido. There's the event code at the bottom if you haven't seen it already. Do you have any interest in connecting with women in your province who have graduated from UP? So this sense of community. Yes, I do. No, I am not interested. Would love to hear your thoughts there. But let's take 2 quick questions. There's a question from Mayanda to Professor Du Plessis. And the question is, Professor Esme, what would you advise the professional women that follow behind you? So women who are in the legal fraternity or potentially even interested in intellectual property and patent law, what advice would you give to them?
Nosi, this is a very challenging question because women at the moment are still trying to establish an equal footing in all areas of activity, professional as well as business, wherever, to compete on an equal footing with men. I would like to say to women, please feel free to make your own choices. Do not let other people prescribe to you what you have to do. Make your own choices. Choose your own careers. Choose how you want to work, where you want to work, and what you want to do. And of course, it's difficult because if you have to make a choice, you have to consider all aspects. Make sure that you have all the necessary qualities and the perseverance to follow your choice to the very end. But at the same time, if halfway down the road you realize that you've made a wrong choice, admit it and change it and go back and choose a different road to achieve your goal. So my advice would be, make sure that you make your own choices. Do not let other people prescribe to you what to choose, but think carefully when you choose that if you make a mistake, admit it and change your course.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Prof. Du Plessis. Choice and change. Make your own choices, but also have the courage to change your choice and to change your decision, to pivot and go in another direction when that is no longer working for you. Now, I've got 30 seconds for a quick question. Let me just get a quick show of hands, just like this, from my panelists. Who is a mother and is part of a family. So just a quick hand like this, because this question is for a person who is a mother. All right. So I'm seeing Prof. Esme's hand there. So Prof, you're going to have to take this one on as well. It's a quick question, just 30 seconds. How do you balance being a mother and a professional? And what have you had to sacrifice at each stage of your career?
First of all, that question, that issue has changed dramatically over the past 3 or 4 or 5 decades. When I was young and wanted to have a family, the thinking was you cannot continue with your full-time career involvement and raise your children at the same time. So what I did was I actually stood back from my firm and took leave of absence and had my children. These days, things have changed. And I believe that's one thing where we have to also support the young professionals. And that is to make sure that they can continue with their work, but still
Yeah.
remain accessible and visible and there for their children. You cannot raise your children and never be there for them as a mother. So you have to available, to be accessible, to be there as a mother. So we have to create support systems to enable women to continue with their careers, have their children, but also be there for their children. And that's a difficult
Fantastic.
one. I can only think of support systems to assist women to continue with their careers, even if they have to scale down a bit. You know, if you
Yeah.
can work 70% of the time to spend time with your children, because I think that's
So,
the most important.
well, so Prof. Esme, it's beautiful that you start off with the prefix to your responses. You know, that was my experience, but I appreciate that many decades later that the experience might be different. And that's, of course, because of the direct results of women and men who have been deliberate about making corporate spaces more sensitive and alive to the fact that women oftentimes have to carry multiple roles of not only being professionals, but potentially being mothers, being sisters, being wives, and partners as well. I want to come to Krishma with this next question. And the question is, what would you say is the single most lesson or life lesson, whichever way you want to look at it, that you learned in your time while at UP? The single most important, impactful lesson as you were doing your MBCHB, Krishma?
I think the most important thing I learned was that the quote that comes to mind, and I just want to say out loud, is the more you do, the more you can do. And that was told to me by one of my senior members in my residence, because when I grew up in high school and all of that, I was just full on academics. I just wanted to get the best marks, and that was it. I never participated in anything cultural and anything sport. And then I came to university and I realized that there's so much more to life than only academics. I have so many things that I'm passionate about that I want to do at the same time. And I know that it's difficult for a lot of students to juggle this, but the key is time management. And if you do have more than one dream, I encourage you to go out there and really just pursue them and take out things that don't add value to your life. Because the more you do,
the more you can do. It's a beautiful philosophy, and I can see that our chat lines are going absolutely crazy with all the communication coming in. Now, let me come back to you, Andrea, and you know, the question that I want to bring to you from our audience is, what do you think is the most significant barrier to female leadership? What do you think is the most significant barrier to female leadership?
I think currently the most significant barrier to female leadership is gender inequality in the workspace and the old traditional way of thinking. I think that holds a lot of women back. It's a lot of inequality and a lot of things they would need to deal with that men aren't subjected to, men won't have to deal with. There's also this glass ceiling that's put on women. You know, women are remunerated and rewarded based on their achievements, as when men are remunerated and rewarded based on their potential. I think once that stigma is removed and women are viewed the same and we are encouraged, we are mentored, and we are seen for the potential that we can reach, we will be able to.
So gender inequality permeating all the way into the corporate space and tainting, if you will, the experience of women in business. Now, there's a couple more questions that have come from the chat function, and I'm going to bring them in a short bit. But I do also want us to go back to our UP days. We promised our audience that they're not only going to hear some of our insights around how do we solve our society's problems, but they're going to hear some of your experience as well. So I'm going to bring this question. Let's see. Let me go back to Taelo and Paul with this question. Highlights and lowlights. Highlights and lowlights. So Taelo, I'll start off with you. And highly impactful highlight, and one thing that you would describe as a lowlight as part of your experience at UP.
Thank you, Nosy. I think I'll start with the lowlights. I hated the exams. I genuinely don't believe exams give you a good indication of whether somebody is capable or not. So I just hated that concept of exams. But I think what was very insightful for me was the syndicate sessions. And I think a big learning for me was, I always thought, there's a saying that goes around the symphony. So if you whistle, you can't whistle a symphony on your own, but you can, as a whole orchestra, it gets to play. So essentially more that teamwork. And what I found was, we got a lot more out of the syndicate sessions because, you're actually learning a lot more. We had an engineer and an investment banker, an accountant, and I think we had about 4 or 5 different careers, merging to form something very powerful. So that for me was something that worked very well.
So of course, Taelo, I'm picking up this is part of your experience at Gibbs, our business school, because I know that syndicate sessions and MBAs go hand in hand, and you'll hear lots of amazing stories of friendships that were formed and lots of horrible stories about overcoming the challenge of working within groups. I think I concur with you. Exams under any context, whether it's at Gibbs or at the University of Pretoria, not a favorite. I think for many of us, not a favorite. Karishma's shaking her head. I think it's not a favorite for her either. Paul, but let's come to you. You're at the institution right now, right? So your lens on what is a current highlight and a current lowlight gives us a specific, it's almost a very unique insight around some of the things that we still need to work on as an institution, but also some of the things that we're getting right.
So my lowlight is the racist institutional culture. I think UP is making strides in actually countering the racism in the institutional culture. But I think there's still a lot more that has to be done. And I think, it breaks my heart when it actually starts affecting students, and to have them face, or get into a space of learning and immediately have to be aware of themselves in that space, firstly as Black people, then as humans, is quite disappointing. What I do find encouraging is that a lot more of us, lecturers and the students, are actually learning to speak up more. This is something that I myself had to learn to do. So I'm one of those people who generally, I let things slide, right? So somebody offends me the first time, and I'm just like, oh, they made a mistake, it won't happen again. But then I realized over time that I'm actually contributing to the problem. I'm encouraging it. I'm giving it a space to thrive. So now I've learned, and I continue to learn every day with every encounter, to speak up against racism. So yeah.
So that's incredible, because what I'm hearing you say, Paul, is that we all actually have a responsibility to shape the culture of the institution to be more of the experience that we not only want for ourselves, but we want for our sons and daughters and our nieces and nephews that will come after us. And so when we do come across instances of institutionalized racism, we actually have a responsibility to call it out, because when we don't, those that who are perpetuating that particular behavior become emboldened because they know that this is part of the culture and no one's going to call me out. And yet, when we call people out, we are saying, this is not our culture. This is not what we want for our institution. And so I am going to call you out. So you also brought us now into this idea of race. And so there are a couple of questions around race. Maybe let me do this. Let me first, I mean, a lot of them are saying to Taelo, but I also know that, race and being black and being white isn't necessarily something that is confined to just Black African South Africans. And so blackness extends to our colored and Indian sisters as well. So I will share some of Taelo's questions that have been put to her around the race issue. And Krishna, I'm going to come to you first. There's a question here that says, and maybe I'll come back to the race question just after this. I want to maybe pick up on this gender one. Have you heard the comment? This is the question. Have you heard the comment that you intimidate men, and what did you do about it? Have you ever been confronted? Andrea is smiling. Andrea, this is not your question. I'm coming to you in a second. I'm going to ask Karishma to go first, and then I'm going to come to you because I think you have a story for us. Have you ever been told that you're intimidating by men, and what did you do about it?
100%. I feel like in society, there is this whole concept where a man is supposed to be this provider, the protector, someone that earns the most money, and we're supposed to sit back and be the mothers, the nurturers, and not really have a goal and a drive. And then you get fantastic women who go and completely change that stereotype, and it becomes very intimidating for our counterparts. And I have definitely been told that, and my response to that would just be to continue doing exactly what I'm doing. It doesn't matter if someone feels intimidated by you. You're never going to be liked by everyone. As long as what you're doing is true to who you are and makes you feel better and makes you feel empowered, then that is 100% what you should be doing. Don't feel pressure from other people.
Fantastic. So continue on your mission and on the purpose that you believe you're here to fulfill. Andrea, let's come to you. What do you do when you're told that you're intimidating, especially by men?
So much like Karishna, there's not really much to do. I think, firstly, if I could say, the reason I was grinning a little is I feel it's a common comment that is thrown out towards women who are seen to be very determined, who are headstrong, who are grounded, level-headed, and who are tenacious in a workplace. It's always a comment you'll face when there's uncertainty. I think it's a lot to do with people trying to box you in. It doesn't necessarily come from our male counterparts because it's a view that's widely shared, but I think not responding and not being forced back into your box, into that strict role, that gender role. This is how a woman is supposed to be. Because I don't think it's a fair comment either. Women don't tend to go around saying that men are intimidating. And based on that, men need to check themselves and put themselves back in that box. So for me, it shows I'm doing something right. It's always an encouragement to me, and it shows that I need to keep doing more of what I'm doing. Because if I wasn't doing something that's incredible, that comment wouldn't have been thrown at me.
Oh, absolutely. That's an incredible insight. Then you remind me of the words of David White, one of my favorite poems, and poets. And he says, never allow the world to label and define you in ways that are too small for you. And this is what I'm hearing you say. So Tyler, there's a question here that says, what has kept you moving in the corporate space as a Black woman in a male-dominated space? So now we're seeing the conflating race, but also conflating gender into this question. What keeps you going as both a female, but a Black female at that?
I think maybe if I can just share a little bit. I think for me, it's first of all accepting that you're a woman and accepting that you're Black. But most importantly, let's talk about accepting that you're a woman. what that meant, and I'll just go back to my experiences, which are probably not very different from Prof. Esme's experiences. At some point, I had to accept that I was having children, and I did continue working, but I had to miss out on promotions, which was very, very unfortunate. And in hindsight, when I look at it, I probably could have achieved a lot more, but I don't have any regrets because I think I've been able to bond with my children and develop that. So it goes back to that choice. But I think what has kept me moving is the fact that I actually want to do better. But what I also just want to touch on is, I think just earlier on this year, it's probably about 2 months ago, I was reading a report that was sponsored by WDB. I think it's a study that was done at the University of Stellenbosch, and just looking at the gender pay gap and so forth. And towards the back end of it, there was a concept around, do we really want to continue to drive equality, or is it equity? So equity means that you're obviously accepting that we are different, and what does that mean? But giving people equal opportunities. And I think I've had to fight quite hard for that. And I think one of the things that I'd like to do in this leadership space is to change the experiences of women such that they don't experience what I experienced. And I think that is what continues to drive me as I grow in this leadership journey.
Absolutely. So being very conscious about the impact and the legacy that you're leaving, so that the lived experiences of women who follow in your footsteps, if you will, is quite different. So that's fantastic, Tyler. I do want to come to the question of mentorship with you, Prof. Du Plessis, because the question here to say, do you think there is enough utilization of more experienced women to mentor young and upcoming women? And if there isn't, how do you think we could potentially close that gap?
Nozi, I want to go back just for a second to the question about the intimidation by women. And
yes.
I would say to my fellow panelists, I think we must regard it as a compliment. If I can intimidate men by thinking clearer, more logical than what they do, if I can intimidate men by working harder, by having more perseverance, by sticking to my principles, then I'm sorry if they're afraid of me, because I regard it as a compliment, because I'm doing what I regard as being right. Okay, mentorship. The concept of mentorship is very interesting because, yes, older people, more experienced people have deeper knowledge, a better understanding of their area of activity. They will be able to give guidance and all of that. But I think, if I think in terms of what women want in their careers, it's more of a discussion, a possible exchange of ideas. I would much rather than having a mentorship situation, have a discussion situation where older and younger women and workers, professionals can be in the same room and exchange ideas of what they see as important, what they see as a route to success, and questions about, but how do you deal with this and how do you deal with that? So I think an exchange of views in a conversational context could probably achieve more than merely giving mentorship to a single person that you will enable to perform better. So I would really appreciate discussion groups where we can sit around a table with younger people and say, and ask them, what do they think? What do they see? What do they experience? And say, but this is what we think, what we experience, and what we might suggest as possible solutions. That's my approach to the issue.
So fantastic. I saw Dr. Paul nodding, so I want to come back to her on that question, because what I'm hearing you say, Prof, is maybe there's an opportunity to reimagine mentor-mentee relationships as we know it. I mean, we know that there's been a lot of literature around the impact of reverse mentoring as well, how you can really have a two-way relationship as a mentor and a mentee. But I'm hearing you say maybe it's not about mentor-mentee, maybe it's more about dialogue, maybe it's more about sharing, maybe it's more about putting all of our lived experiences on the table and learning from each other, irrespective of who is who in the relationship. Dr. what are your thoughts? I see your head nodding. I don't want to put words in your mouth. What are your thoughts on this?
I completely agree with Professor Duplessis that it should be a reciprocated relationship. As a lecturer, I've found myself awed by what students share with me in terms of their, interpretation of articles or book chapters that I've read 100 times, but suddenly they give me a new perspective. Sometimes it's just learning about the social culture. I'm so out of touch with what's happening with their age group, and I learn from them in that way. And so I think it has to be a conversation. It cannot just be a top-down, situation where the younger people are always learning from the older people. And I think there's also a danger in thinking that older people or more experienced people are actually wiser than the younger people. So I think I'd caution against thinking about age maturity as a natural pair to wisdom.
Sure. Now, if you're not tweeting that, I don't know what you're tweeting tonight. Age maturity is not necessarily a natural pair to wisdom. I love that. So even young people can come with wisdom. There's a beautiful question that's been posted by Noktula. So I just want to play with it a little bit. And the question is, how do we challenge gender roles that are imposed on us in the workplace? And maybe I want to just make it more broadly. How do we challenge gender roles in general? Because we know sometimes that the imposition of gender roles is actually more acute in the home and in the family. And we often hear the narrative, you can go and be an executive out there, but when you come home, you need to be this and not that. And so I think this idea of gender roles isn't limited to the workplace, but it's broad. And of course, in the workplace, sometimes we see it as women being expected, because we're having a meeting, to run out and coordinate the coffee or coordinate the tea and all of these things. How do we challenge these in the workplace? Karishma, when that gender role straitjacket is being put on you, how do you challenge it?
I think the most important thing is to know what you offer. For example, like, I feel that in the medical field specifically, there are definitely gender roles when it comes to specialties. Like, you would never usually find a female in the orthopedics field. You would see most of the specializing people be male. And I think it's just to know what you offer and to know what your interests are and to really just push on those boundaries and to not limit yourself in those aspects.
Andrea, your thoughts here?
So, also building on what Karishma said, I think it's a difficult conversation to have, but specifically in the workplace, challenging that is knowing what your role entails and what you bring to the table. What is your value add? So when you are put in those typical gender roles, to firmly push back, using that firm no, being very diplomatic about it. Those critical conversations, they need to be had when you do find it occurring. And to not be over emotional or sensitive about it.
So what I'm hearing you saying is that you've got to be firm. You've got to be forthright. You've got to get your messaging across in the way that you actually intend for it to learn. Now, I'm seeing Paul is also putting here in the chat. Actually, I don't recognizing them because recognizing them gives them authority. And I definitely take that point. I've got a beautiful question that has come through, and I think, in the light of it being August around the world and the meaning behind August in South Africa, what a beautiful opportunity for us to also acknowledge other women. So I've got 1 minute left, so I just need a word in response. The question is, which woman do you admire or look up to today? Just one word, not a paragraph, not a sentence, just one word. I'm going to start off with Taelo, to you. Who are you admiring today? Nolita Paputa, and yes, beautiful book, Boardroom Dancing, that she released a couple of months ago. Andrea, who are you admiring? Can't hear you, Andrea. You've got to unmute.
Oh, sorry. Just just repeat? Did you ask me what my answer is?
Yes, who do you admire right now?
So for me personally, it'll be Michelle Obama right now.
Yeah.
Michelle Obama. Thank you so much. Dr. Paul?
I'd say all independent women.
All independent women, love that. Prof. Duplessis, who's on your admiration list right now?
Well, if you have been watching television recently, and if you are aware of what is happening in the United States of America, then I think Nancy Pelosi stands up to what women have to fight for. And if I
Got
had the
you.
courage that she has, I think I would
Yeah.
be proud of myself.
Absolutely, and she's been really phenomenal around standing her ground. Karishma, one woman that you admire today, just the name of the woman.
Definitely Michelle Obama as well.
Yeah, Michelle Obama, she gets 2 votes tonight. What a fantastic conversation, ladies. Thank you so much for an incredible conversation. We've run out of time, but to our audience, one more poll, please, as I come to you. One more poll. How likely are you to refer this LeadUP event to business colleagues and other alumni, with 1 being very unlikely and 10 being extremely unlikely? And of course, as you take that poll, let me bring you the results of the second poll we took around whether you'd like to connect with women in your province. Again, the sense of community, we got an overwhelming 100%. Yes, I would actually love to do that. I do want to make sure that I don't get my neck chopped off by not mentioning that today's conversation was made possible by the University of Pretoria Alumni Relations team, fantastic team that has done an absolutely fantastic job. Also, ladies and gentlemen, a very big thank you to you who have joined us from wherever you are in the world, and a huge round of applause to our panelists who've shown up in an incredible way this evening. And a very big thank you to Samantha for TikToking with me right at the beginning while we are waiting for our technical gremlins to settle. From myself, Nozipho Shabalala, what a privilege and an honor to be the moderator of tonight's conversation. Thank you and goodbye.